Everyone, and welcome to today's writing clinic. Today, we're going to talk about elevating your academic writing voice. And as you already know the basics of academic writing. This session's going to help you to refine your style and make your writing more persuasive, nuanced, and of course, analytical. So let's get into it. So during your first year, your focus was on mastering the basics. We avoided slang. We were using evidence for the first time, and we were focusing on writing clearly. Now, in your first year or your second year, your goal is to move from writing that is simply just correct to writing that's persuasive, has nuance, and is, as we said before, analytical. So by the end of this workshop, you should be able to identify what makes excellent writing, learn strategies to elevate your own writing, and of course, to then employ those strategies in your assignments. So, what makes writing excellent? First, first we're going to focus on clarity. Now, clarity is a combination with sophistication, which will help to really elevate your writing. Okay, so here you want to have a focus of short and varied sentences. Okay, so you want to have short sentences with a really short impact, and then longer sentences that have a lot of variety in them. Okay, so the second aspect that we want to focus on is criticality. And that is when you are using words, sentences to describe, to elevate, and you are using your sources as just a bit more than as adding in where your reference is from. Okay, so you're describing your sources and you're going to elevate them and then synthesize your sources. If you're already doing that, that's super. Okay, but we will look at other ways where you can incorporate this to a greater degree. So, the third aspect of what makes writing excellent is lexical precision. So these are when you will choose your verbs with great consideration. Okay, so you'll use verbs such as argues, claims, and demonstrates. They all have different meanings, and if you've been using them interchangeably, now's the time to stop and pause and go back and have a good think about how we should be using these verbs. Okay, and then the fourth aspect of what makes writing excellent is nuance. So nuance is when we'll use a lot of cautious language. For example, the phrase may suggest or remains contested to show awareness about the complexity of the issue. Okay, so you would show nuance to say you have read a lot of material, you understand the material in great depth, and you understand the overall views that may exist on those topics. Okay, on to the next slide. So yes, so now we're going to look at standard versus elevated comparisons, okay? So here we're going to look at this. Our first standard example is research shows that social media affects students' well-being. Now you may say, oh, that sounds like a great sentence. It does. However, we are focusing on academic English. So how could we elevate that sentence? Okay. Now remember, it's just stating a fact. Research shows social media affects social students' well-being. We need to then prop the sentence up with facts to support it. Otherwise, it's just simply of hearsay. I believe this, so I'm saying this. We know the importance of using evidence, and to elevate it, we will use evidence that ties into what we are trying to say. So let's look at the elevated approach of the sentence. So while studies suggest, and that's an interesting verb there, suggest, social media can influence well-being. And here's a nuance slipping through, okay? The extent remains contested, and that's by Nguyen, 2021. Okay, so you may say, okay, I have my reference in, that's it. But we are changing the way the sentence is. So maybe you would write as research, so social media affects students' well-being, and then you would have your reference at the end, and you're like, oh, that's a great academic sentence. It shows research. However, when we are elevating our writing, we want to show that we understand what we are writing about. Okay, and the one way we do that is by adding in nuance, adding in evidence, adding our verbs to show that we are aware of what we are writing. Okay, so why is this version much stronger? You may say it looks pretty much the same, but if you go back and you have a read through, you may see there is a very large difference. Okay, so the second version is much stronger because it acknowledges debate. It's not just stating social media effects. It's saying that it's still a lot of research undergoing in this area, and we haven't yet discovered if there is a strong correlation or a slight correlation or any other logistics with that research, but it's still being investigated. Okay. It uses a precise verb, and the precise verb is suggest. Okay. So by the use of word suggest, it's giving you an added impact and demonstrates criticality. Now, remember, as you are studying and you're getting further along in your degree, your lecturer wants to see that you understand the subject matter that you are reading and writing about. Okay, so the one way you can demonstrate that is by using criticality in your writing. On to the next one. So let's look at strategies we can employ to elevate our writing. So there are basically four key strategies that are being used. So the first one is to vary your sentence structures to avoid monotony. Okay, so maybe you may have really long sentences and you think, I need to have really long sentences to have the impact that I want. It does ring monotonous, and as I mentioned earlier, short sentences with long sentences really have an impact, okay? They keep you focused and it's easier to read. So the second strategy that you can employ is to use evidence critically. Now, you may already employ these two terms here, using evidence. You may already, and you should be using evidence in your writing, but we want to focus on using it critically. So it's not just summarizing your sources, but evaluating them. Okay, so this is when you look at your sources and you make an informed decision on what you've been reading. So the third strategy that you can choose is word choice and style. So I know it may be very tempting to use vague words because you're not too sure yourself and you read a bit, but you're unfamiliar with a lot of the terminology. So you just want to go with the buzzwords that you've seen around. So instead of that, it does take a bit more time. Use precise ones and use formal connectors. Okay. And the fourth strategy that you can employ is editing. I know when you see that word count and it's like 3,500 words, you want to get maximum sentences really long and you want to get as much information out there to show you understand the topic. And then editing will be lost, or you may not even have time for editing. But if you edit for conciseness, it'll be beneficial. Okay. I always say edit, write, edit, and then go back and edit again. Because as you develop your writing, when you start your paragraphs and they will have a flow, you may go back and want to change them. So one way you can do that is by editing. And also, if you edit, it will help you to check that your arguments are clear and direct. Now, remember, your lecturer, whoever is marking, will be needing to know that you understand the topic sentence or the topic question. And the only way they can do that is by your writing. Okay, so make sure it is clear It is easy to understand, and you are not adding in unnecessary information. Okay, so let's look at using evidence critically. So here's an example um, of evidence, and we're going to have a basic approach, which is Brown, who is our author, published in 2020, and says X. Now, you're probably at the point where you say this and you're like, but this is what I do all the time. It's fine. I get by. I'm referencing, I'm adding, I'm paraphrasing as needed. However, we want to focus on elevating our writing. Okay. So to elevate it, all we are simply doing in this sentence, or the first basic one, is a statement. We are saying this author says this. Okay. Now, in order for us to come across as more of a nuance or more of an understanding of the topic, we would have to add in our own input. So this is where it's great to even contrast with two authors. Okay, and a very clever way you could do this to show an understanding of the topic is by having contrasting views. Okay, so let's show how we can write about contrasting views on the same topic. So let's have a look at this. So an elevated version, Eve, although Brown 2020 challenges X, and X could be any topic, latest studies challenge this view, and this is by Lee, 2022. Now, the first source is in 2020. So maybe this author in 2020 had this founding statement about this matter. However, later research that was probably based off their original research shows a different train of thought or a different aspect of that research. So by you demonstrating that you have read both of these researchers, and you understand the nuance of this topic, you are able to construct a sentence that shows you that you understand the complexity of this topic. Okay, so if you can notice the last point, it's showing it's a shift from your summary where you just simply state a fact, and now you are evaluating your information. So here we can notice the difference, how we are changing from one source of evidence to two sources of evidence, and they may be contrasting, but it still develops your point. Okay, let's go into the next one. Now, editing for conciseness. This is always something I've struggled with personally. I do always like to add in a lot of extra words, and I go back and I struggle to cut them out. However, it's something I've developed over time that I'm still working on. So I understand if you may also have the same struggles as me. But let's focus on this slide for now. Okay, so it is essential. You may have your wordy example, it is very clear that many students in higher education institutions at the present time are facing a large number of challenges relating to managing time. Now, that sounds like a sentence I may read in a textbook. Okay, it sounds like a very normal sentence I may come across when reading research. However, it is a tad bit long, okay? So it's trying to sound a bit important by adding too many adjectives, too many words that are not related, and there is a sense of repetition, okay? Now, while we want to sound academic and we want to have an academic voice that comes across very clearly, we can also lose credibility if we ourselves are not able to self-edit. So self-editing is where you are able to look at what you produced and to go back and say, okay, I like this, I'm not too sure about this, and focus on what is really important, and can the audience who is either listening or reading your information understand your main point. Okay, so while it sounds pretty normal, pretty average, what you may see. It is a tad bit wordy, as in too many words are being used, okay? So let's look at the concise version that we can use. So the concise version is many higher education students face significant time management challenges. So what they've done is they've taken the crux, which is higher education students and facing time management challenges, and put the focus straight on that. So in one sentence, you are able to understand. If this was your topic sentence at the beginning of your paragraph, you'd be like, okay, so now I know the rest of the paragraph will be focusing on time management challenges, okay? However, with this, you are a bit unclear about what the leading paragraphs could lead up to. You aren't sure about what the author is trying to say. And of course, has a lot of words with not that much of an impact. Contrastly, you have the concise version, less words, but more of an impact. The second version is shorter, it is clearer, and surprisingly more academic. Now, I think the emphasis on more academic may come across as a bit strange because you're like, oh, but research journals are very lengthy. They have a lot of data, a lot of information. But remember, people who publish research have done a lot of self-editing. There's a lot of information they probably uncovered, but they've only chosen to share the very important information that is critical for that topic. Okay, so even though you may lean towards this, myself guilty, it is much better to lean towards a concise version. Okay, so let's look at model paragraphs. So model paragraphs, we're going to look at what do we want them to look like. So we want our model paragraphs to be competent. We want them to be focusing on being clear, being factual, descriptive use of evidence, okay? It may seem like the standard, but it will often lack depth. Okay, it doesn't have all the nuances that you need. It doesn't have suggestive verbs. So let's work towards an excellent paragraph. So what makes a paragraph excellent? A paragraph that is excellent will be balanced, okay? So it won't show a straight view of one specific topic. It will give you an overall understanding or an overall view of the topic. It's going to have nuances. It will show you about the contrast between things, different research that was done at different times. What was the past research? What's current research? What will emerging research look like? It will synthesize sources. So when we're talking about synthesizing sources, as some of you may know, we are looking at sources with multiple researchers and using them in our writing, okay? So you wouldn't just have, for example, as Brown says, you would have as per Brown's understanding, and then you'd contrast that with as determined by Lee 2020. Okay, so we'd use different sources. And of course, we want to focus on using precise language. Now, I know in academia, we do have a lot of flowery language. We have a lot of jargon. So it's important where you can to use specific and precise language. And it should also flow logically. Okay, so if you are developing your essay, you would have a great topic sentence, you would have the rest of your paragraph, and then your paragraphs would flow with ease. If you ever come across the point where you are stuck with your writing, I will always suggest go back, have a look at your topic sentence. Is your topic sentence clear? Can you understand what that topic is will be focusing about. If that topic sentence is not clear, that means your paragraph that follows will be vague, and you yourself will not be sure of what to put in that paragraph because you haven't determined your topic sentence, okay? So that's always one way to just catch if you are having a problem with flow. Just go back, reevaluate topic sentences. And of course, we should always be aiming for excellent writings in our university here. Okay, so I would say you could compare side by side to see differences and see how you yourself can develop that. All right, so as we end off the session, I just want to go through our conclusion and have a short reflection. So your writing at this point should mainly focus on nuance, your sophistication, and of course, criticality. And how can you get to these points? How can you elevate your writing? It's by using your varied sentence structures, precise language, evidence-based evaluation, and concise expression. Now, when you are writing, always check in with yourself. Am I stating information or am I analyzing it? Now, remember in your foundation year, you probably were just stating information, and that was fine because that was the basics of writing. If you were still just stating information, now is the time to look at how you can change your writing from basic to a more elevated writing. Okay, now these tips that I've spoke about today, you will carry on for the rest of your degree. And if you do any postgraduate after that studies, you would obviously use them and you would elevate your writing continuously. Now, remember, writing is not a stagnant road. It's always room for improvement. So always think about what you've written last and think about what strategies you can use from today and to improve it in the future. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed today's session. And as always, please feel free to reach out to me if you would like any assistance with academic writing. My name's Christine, and thank you.